This crime boss controlled everyone through fear. But today he made a mistake he didn't even realize. The room was silent, too silent for a place like this, hidden behind steel gates and guarded by men who never smiled. A powerful crime boss leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. To him, this was just another night of control, money, and fear. Somewhere inside the same compound, a young girl sat alone, frightened, clutching hope like it was her last breath. No one had come for her. Not the police, not the media, and certainly not anyone brave enough to challenge a man like him. That's what everyone believed. Outside, rain tapped softly against the pavement as a simple, looking man stood still watching the building. No weapons in sight. No backup, no anger on his face, just calm. The kind of calm that doesn't rush and doesn't make mistakes. He wasn't there to beg. He wasn't there to threaten. He was there because someone had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Inside, laughter echoed through the hall. The crime boss mocked the idea of consequences. He believed power meant being untouchable. He believed fear was permanent. And most of all, he believed no one would ever outsmart him on his own ground. He was wrong. The man outside didn't move when the guards passed. He didn't react when doors opened and closed. He simply waited, as if time itself was working for him. Every second stretched the tension tighter. Every breath felt heavier. Something was coming, something the people inside couldn't see yet. They thought strength came from weapons. They thought authority came from violence. They thought intelligence shouted. But real danger doesn't announce itself. As thunder rolled in the distance, the man finally stepped forward. Not with force, not with fear, but with absolute certainty. Somewhere deep inside the compound, a shift had already begun, though no one realized it yet. The crime boss was still smiling. The guards were still confident, and the girl was still waiting. This wasn't the beginning of a fight. This was the beginning of a mistake they would never forget. By the time they understood who they were dealing with, it would already be too late. The girl believed no one was coming, but one man did, without noise, without anger. This world was built on power, but not the kind people admire. It was the kind that feeds on fear, silence, and obedience. The crime boss didn't just control money or territory, he controlled people. Guards followed orders not because they believed in him, but because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. Fear had become routine here, almost normal, like background noise no one questioned anymore. To the outside world, this place was invisible. Complaints disappeared. Witnesses stayed quiet. Even officials learned to look the other way. That's how power like this survives, not through constant violence, but through the belief that resistance is useless. When people feel small long enough, they stop trying to fight back. Inside the compound, the kidnapped girl was treated like an object, not a human being. To the crime boss, she wasn't a child with a family and dreams, she was leverage, a message. Proof that he could take whatever he wanted and face no consequences. That mindset didn't come from strength. It came from arrogance built over years of never being challenged. And yet, this kind of power is fragile. Deep down, the crime boss needed everyone to believe he was unstoppable. That belief was his real weapon. Without it, the fear would fade, and the control would crumble. That's why he surrounded himself with loyal men, loud laughter, and constant displays of dominance. It wasn't confidence, it was maintenance. Outside, the quiet man understood this better than anyone. He didn't see a monster. He saw a human being addicted to control. Someone who mistook cruelty for strength and noise for authority. He knew that rushing in with force would only reinforce the boss's belief system. Violence would prove him right. Instead, the man chose patience. He knew that real change happens when fear shifts direction. When the powerful begin to feel uncertain. When silence becomes heavier than shouting. This wasn't about winning a fight, it was about dismantling an illusion. Every system built on fear has one weakness. It collapses the moment people stop believing in it. Inside the compound, everything still looked the same. Guards stood tall, orders were followed. The crime boss felt secure. But beneath the surface, something had already started to crack. And no one noticed. Because they were too busy believing the lie they had lived with for so long. That belief was about to be tested. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely helpless? Where the odds were stacked so heavily against you that giving up seemed like the only option? This isn't a story about fighting. It's a story of intelligence versus arrogance. The crime boss didn't need to raise his voice to dominate a room. His presence alone did the work. The moment he entered, conversations died. Backs straightened, and eyes dropped to the floor. Years of unchecked power had taught everyone the same lesson: survival meant obedience. He enjoyed that silence. It reminded him who was in control. He paced slowly across the room, taking his time, letting the tension build. This was his stage. Every person here existed to reflect his importance. When he stopped in front of someone, it wasn't to listen, it was to be admired or feared. Tonight he was in an especially good mood. Things had gone his way for too long to expect otherwise. Then he noticed the quiet man. No bowing, no nervous smile, no attempt to impress. That alone was enough to irritate him. The boss smirked and gestured toward the man, his tone dripping with mockery. He commented on the man's simple clothes, his calm posture, the way he stood as if he belonged. Laughter followed, forced, eager laughter from men who knew their role. The boss fed on it. Public humiliation was one of his favorite tools. It reminded everyone how quickly dignity could be taken away. People like you, he said slowly, circling him, usually know better than to stand this straight in my presence. The insult was deliberate, loud, designed to echo. Heads turned. Everyone waited for the reaction. Anger, a plea, something. But the man didn't give him that. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He simply looked at the crime boss, not with defiance, but with quiet focus. That response confused the room. The boss felt it too. Confusion was dangerous. He masked it with cruelty. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make people strain to hear. He spoke about power, about how the world really worked. He made it clear that mercy was weakness and silence was submission. Then he crossed the line on purpose, bringing up the kidnapped girl as if she were nothing more than a bargaining chip. The room stiffened. Some of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Others laughed nervously. The boss enjoyed that reaction. Fear mixed with discomfort meant control. He believed he was teaching a lesson, not just to the man, but to everyone watching. Heroes don't walk in quietly. He sneered. They don't last long either. Still nothing. That calm began to irritate him more than any insult ever could. The boss expected resistance so he could crush it. Instead, he felt like he was swinging at air. His men watched closely now, not amused anymore, but curious. Why wasn't this man reacting? Finally, the man spoke, but not to defend himself. He asked a simple question. Not about power, not about threats, not about fear, a question about timing. The boss laughed loudly, but something in his eyes changed. Questions meant thinking. Thinking led to doubt. He brushed it off, pretending it was nothing, yet his smile tightened. He responded with another insult, sharper than before, reminding everyone that this place, these people, and this situation belonged to him. But the damage was already done. The man's silence had shifted the balance. The boss was still loud, still powerful, still surrounded by men. But for the first time, he was working harder than the person he was trying to humiliate. And power hates effort. The boss ended the exchange with a dismissive wave, convinced he had won. The laughter returned, less confident now. The quiet man stepped back unchanged, as if the insults had passed right through him. What the crime boss didn't realize was simple. He hadn't broken the man in front of him. He had revealed himself. And everyone in the room had seen it. Still surrounded by his men, still wearing confidence like armor. Yet something invisible had crept in. Uncertainty. And uncertainty makes even the powerful uncomfortable. Steven remained exactly where he was. His posture relaxed, his expression calm. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone, and that was precisely what made him unsettling. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make others fill it with their own thoughts. When the boss spoke again, his words were sharper, more aggressive. He talked about rules, territory, and consequences. He wanted a reaction, any reaction, to regain control. Steven gave him none. He responded slowly, choosing each word with care, not to challenge the boss directly but to guide the conversation. It felt less like an argument and more like a lesson unfolding in real time. Steven asked questions that sounded harmless on the surface. Questions about schedules, about routines, about how long certain things usually took. Each question forced the boss to explain himself, and with every explanation, cracks appeared. The more the boss talked, the more he revealed habits, patterns. Steven wasn't overpowering anyone physically. He was slowly taking control of the room by shifting attention away from fear and toward awareness. The boss's voice grew louder, but his influence felt thinner. Steven never insulted him, never mocked him. That restraint mattered. It showed discipline, and discipline commands a different kind of respect, one that can't be forced. While the boss relied on intimidation, Steven relied on certainty. He knew why he was there, and that clarity made everything else feel unnecessary. At one point, the boss tried to corner him verbally, accusing him of arrogance for standing so calmly. Steven didn't deny it. He simply looked at him and paused. That pause did more damage than any argument could have. Silence gave people time to think, and thinking was dangerous in a place built on blind obedience. The tension became heavy, even the air felt tight. Steven spoke again, this time about responsibility. Not as a threat, but as a fact. He reminded the room that every action leaves a trace. Every choice creates a consequence. The words weren't dramatic, yet they landed hard because they were true. Truth has weight, especially when no one is used to hearing it spoken out loud. The boss felt it slipping. Control. Attention, belief. He tried to reassert dominance with jokes and insults, but they no longer landed the same way. Steven's calm had exposed the weakness behind the noise. Power built on fear needs constant reinforcement. Power built on certainty does not. By now everyone was watching Steven, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't threatened anyone, and yet the room revolved around him. The crime boss was still standing, still armed, still dangerous, but for the first time, he wasn't leading the moment. Steven was. And the most unsettling part was this: he hadn't even started yet. By now, the tension in the room was impossible to ignore. People weren't just watching anymore, they were feeling something shift. When power changes hands, even slightly, humans sense it before they understand it. The guards stood in the same positions, weapons still at their sides, but their posture had changed. Shoulders were tighter, eyes moved more often, confidence was being replaced by calculation. This is how doubt begins, not loudly. Not all at once, it starts quietly in the human mind, when what we believe no longer matches what we're seeing. The crime boss noticed it too. He didn't need to look around to feel it. He could hear it in the way responses came a half-second slower. He could see it in the way some men avoided eye contact, not with him but with Steven. That was dangerous. Loyalty built on fear is fragile, and once people start thinking for themselves, control weakens fast. Steven understood this human behavior deeply. He knew that people don't change sides because they are brave. They change sides because they are tired of fear, tired of pretending, tired of living in constant tension. He didn't push them. He didn't ask for loyalty. He simply continued speaking with clarity and calm, allowing others to reach their own conclusions. As minutes passed, whispers began to spread, quiet, almost invisible. Some were confused. Some were curious. Others were afraid of what might happen next. Human beings naturally look for safety in uncertain moments, and right now, the loudest voice in the room no longer felt like the safest one. The girl's situation hung heavily over everything. Even those who had convinced themselves it was just business couldn't ignore the human reality forever. A child taken from her life, held as leverage. Steven spoke about her not as a problem, not as a threat, but as a person. That shift mattered. When we are reminded of someone's humanity, it becomes harder to justify cruelty. The boss tried to interrupt, to pull the focus back to himself. He mocked concern. He dismissed emotions as weakness. But emotionally detached power often misunderstands one thing: humans are driven by meaning, not just fear. The more he downplayed the girl's suffering, the more uncomfortable the room became. Some of the men had families. Some had children. That connection, even unspoken, created internal conflict. Psychologically, once empathy appears, it can't be erased. It creates friction between orders and conscience. Steven didn't need to say this out loud. The silence did the work for him. Time slowed. Every second felt heavier. The boss knew delays were dangerous. The longer this continued, the more unstable his authority became. Steven, on the other hand, was patient. He understood that pressure reveals truth. Under pressure, people show who they really are. A small mistake was made, barely noticeable. A guard spoke out of turn. A detail slipped. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Steven caught it instantly. Not with excitement, not with triumph. Just quiet recognition. That was the moment the balance truly shifted. Because once doubt turns into awareness, it can't be undone. The room hadn't erupted. No one had defected openly. But internally, the crime boss was no longer alone at the top. His power was being questioned, not by rebellion, but by human thought. And thought is the beginning of change. The crime boss realized it too late. The room was still under his control on paper, his men, his territory, his rules, but the atmosphere no longer obeyed him. What had once felt solid now felt unstable, like standing on ground that had begun to crack beneath his feet. He tried to tighten his grip, speaking faster, issuing sharper commands, but urgency exposed weakness. Authority loses its edge the moment it has to beg for attention. Steven didn't rush the moment. Humans often make mistakes when they sense victory, but he understood something more important: real power moves quietly. He allowed the boss to speak, to fill the space with frustration. Every word only revealed how much control was slipping away. Steven watched the reactions instead, the guards, the advisors, the faces that no longer mirrored blind obedience. This was the psychological turning point. Steven began to connect the details that had already been revealed, not dramatically, not like a speech, but in a calm, almost conversational tone. He repeated information the boss had shared earlier, placing it in a different order. Humans react strongly when they hear their own words used against them. The crime boss froze briefly, recognizing pieces of his own logic turned inside out. For the first time, he felt exposed. The boss tried to shift tactics. He laughed it off, claiming none of it mattered. But humans sense truth instinctively. The laughter didn't spread. No one joined in. Silence answered instead, and silence is unforgiving. It forces reflection, and reflection makes lies uncomfortable. Steven addressed the room not as enemies, but as people. He spoke about consequences, not as punishment, but as inevitability. Every system built on fear eventually collapses because fear demands constant energy. People get tired, loyalty fades, and when that happens, even the strongest-looking structure falls from the inside. That idea landed deeply. Several men lowered their eyes, not in submission to the boss, but in thought. The human mind seeks stability, and Steven offered a version of stability that didn't rely on cruelty or chaos. He didn't promise safety, he offered clarity. The crime boss sensed the shift and reacted emotionally. His voice rose. His movements became sharper. Emotional reactions feel powerful, but psychologically, they signal loss of control. Steven remained still, grounding the moment. When one person stays calm while another spirals, observers instinctively trust the calmer presence. Then came the quiet turning point. A single order from the boss was delayed. Just a second too long, no refusal, no argument. Just hesitation. That hesitation said everything. It meant the belief system was broken. The boss saw it in their eyes and understood the truth he'd avoided for years. His power existed only as long as people believed in it. Steven spoke again, softly. He pointed out that the girl could still be returned safely. That this didn't have to end in destruction. This wasn't mercy. It was logic. Humans respond better to an exit than a trap. By offering a path forward, Steven removed the boss's excuse to escalate. The room waited. Finally, the boss realized he was outmaneuvered. Not physically, mentally, socially. Human systems don't collapse with explosions, they collapse with quiet agreement. The girl's location was revealed without ceremony, without drama, no heroics. Just a chain of small human decisions finally aligning in the right direction. Steven didn't celebrate. He didn't threaten. He simply acknowledged the outcome. The girl was freed, safe. Unharmed, the boss stood there, still powerful in appearance, but hollow. His authority had been dismantled not by force, but by exposure. Everyone now knew what he really was, a man dependent on fear, not strength. As Steven prepared to leave, he spoke one final time, not to dominate, but to conclude. "You never asked who I was," he said calmly. He didn't need to explain further. By now, it didn't matter. The truth had already done the work. The room stayed silent long after he left. Because once power is seen for what it truly is, it never feels the same again. The moment the girl was safe, something subtle but powerful happened. The tension that had filled the room didn't explode, it dissolved. Fear didn't vanish instantly, but it lost its grip. From a human perspective, this matters. When danger ends quietly, people are left alone with their thoughts, and those thoughts often change them more than chaos ever could. Steven didn't stay to watch the aftermath. He didn't need credit, gratitude, or applause. Humans who act from ego usually linger, waiting to be acknowledged. Steven didn't. His calm departure sent a final message: the mission mattered, not the recognition. That alone reshaped how everyone in the room understood strength. The crime boss was left standing in silence, surrounded by men who now saw him differently, not as an untouchable force, but as a human being who had relied too heavily on fear. From a psychological standpoint, this is devastating. Power built on intimidation collapses once people realize it can be challenged, not with violence but with clarity. Some of the men would leave that life. Others wouldn't. Change is rarely instant. But doubt had been planted, and doubt grows. When people experience a moment where fear loses, they begin questioning every moment that came before it. That internal shift is how systems fall over time, not overnight, but inevitably. The girl's rescue mattered for more than just her safety. It reminded everyone involved of something simple yet often forgotten: human life is not leverage. When someone is reduced to a tool, it takes conscious effort to restore their humanity. Steven never spoke dramatically about morals, yet his actions communicated them clearly. He treated the girl as a person from the very beginning, and that choice quietly redefined the entire situation. Justice didn't come in the form of revenge, no shouting, no humiliation, just consequence. Humans respond deeply to fairness when it's handled with restraint. That restraint made the outcome feel earned rather than forced. It showed that power doesn't need to destroy to be effective, it needs to be precise. As word of what happened spread, it didn't sound like a legend filled with violence. It sounded almost unbelievable because of how calm it was. One man walked in, fear shifted direction, a child walked out safe. That simplicity is what made it powerful. People trust stories that feel human, not exaggerated. Steven's final lesson wasn't spoken directly, but it lingered long after he was gone. Real power doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand submission, and doesn't need fear to exist. It shows up quietly, does what's right, and leaves before ego can take credit. This story doesn't end with applause, it ends with reflection, and reflection is where real change begins. More powerful stories like this are coming. If this one stayed with you, share which moment impacted you the most. Your feedback helps shape what comes next. In your opinion, what is real power, silence, or fear? Share your thoughts in the comments.